Back, everyone. I got a real treat for us today. I got Glen Wilson, the co-founder of Custom HR with a K. And he's been in the game for 20 years in the HR space. And essentially, he is replacing pesky call centers, which I know everyone loves when you get on the phone with a pesky call center, and adjusting that for real human interactions. And they just started this company about 18 months ago. What caused you to jump ship and start your own adventure here with Custom HR, Glenn? And thanks for hopping on.
Josh, thanks for having me, and great question to start with. It really started with my partner Fred Caraminal and I, seeing an opportunity to add and increase value in the fractional HR and HR consulting space for our small and mid-size clients. We've seen over the last several years an increase in HR services being sold as kind of like an add-on benefit for a variety of different industries and vendors. But at the same time, the services behind those have kind of been decreased, where HR consultants are taking on more and more clients and having less and less bandwidth to really invest, or providing like the same tool for like maybe a 500 person client to a 25-person client, where rather than kind of digging in and customizing those needs for each individual client.
What were you seeing in the HR space that wasn't getting the attention that it needed? That'll, ultimately you're like, I'm gonna do my own thing because there's areas that definitely need improvement.
Right. So a lot of it was people were really excited to buy into the HR services through possibly their payroll vendors or benefit brokers, or even their PEOs at the time. Uh, However, what we were seeing and what we were finding was that then the clients had an HR need. They went and reached out and they couldn't get in contact. They ended up in this call center and press 1 for this, 3 for that, 9 for that, or these mass email addresses that they just kind of like team 5 at such and such company, right? And so there wasn't really a name or a face to the consultant they were working with.
As the what I see is like, as the organizations get larger, simple problems become big problems because you're not able to deal with them at speed. So like, for example, at my organization, something happened. I went to refund a client. It took me all of 12 seconds, versus at these larger companies, something goes wrong. You have to get this approval and this approval and this approval, rather than just like hold yourself accountable, do the right thing, and, move forward. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Spot on, Josh. But it's even we want to get to the point with our clients, and the thing that we really harp on with our clients, and I say that in the most positive way, is that when we're onboarding new clients, we always stress, don't wait to the problem to call us. As soon as you have like an inkling, something doesn't feel right, reach out. Let's talk. Let's strategize. And that's where we really feel like there's the value differentiation, particularly in HR. When you wait too long, when the fire is now roaring, it's almost too late. And now we become like reactive. We want to work with our clients, provide that service, and build a scalable teams and bandwidth so that we can be there before it's an issue, and put strategies in place to mitigate those problems, and find happy resolutions for our employers and their employees.
What are some of the things most HR departments at companies are just completely ignoring right now that you've been seeing?
So I think the tough part has been really getting in and working with clients and helping them on coaching in regards to feedback. Feedback is tough. Uh, a lot of managers just don't like to deliver feedback because it's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to tell people, give people negative commentary or negative feedback. They feel like they're hurting somebody's feelings. They don't want to be a jerk. Whereas on the same time, by not saying anything, you're also not helping somebody, and it's equally as destructive to not tell somebody because you're not giving that opportunity to improve. The problem is that from an HR consulting side, if you're not there and engaged in helping coach the client from that very beginning process, you're not helping them correct downstream issues and effects. You're not helping them build scalable processes. And you're only just getting reactionary calls that could have been solved through some realignments and conversations and some manager training and coaching. That's what we're there for at the end of the day, to work with our clients and be proactive. And whether that means being on those video calls or those virtual meetings, or being on site with our clients and working with them the way that is best for them to help give them the support they need.
It's tough when you could help someone solve problems they're not even aware of. Unfortunately, when you reach out, people are like, well, I already got someone for that. And they feel like they are covered until that I was at Merrill and I got like a check for like a few $1,000s because of a class action lawsuit because someone's time wasn't being reported correctly. And that easily could have been handled internally. And who knows? I mean, I only got a few $1,000s, but I mean, at a company that large, who knows how much that was?
Right. Right. And so where we want to be helpful with our clients is being proactive in those ever-changing regulations, in regulations that come from the federal, the state, and the growing local regulations. I mean, we're all familiar with, most of us are familiar with California, and from like a labor and employment law, California can be one of the more complex because they really started that trend of having a lot of different local regulations from north to south across the state. And then we started seeing other states adopt that as well, across like New York and New Jersey tend to start picking up some of those trends. But what we also then see more recently is the growing wage transparency and wage transparency laws coming out. Just recently, for example, Illinois will be one of the newer states that beginning in January 1, 2025, employers with 15 or more employees will have to post a wages with their job descriptions and have to provide pay wages for each of their new job openings. Those are the types of things where we want to work proactively with our clients and give them the updates and let them know, hey, here's this thing coming down the road. We don't have to do it until January, but should we start trying this now? Here are the considerations we should be putting into place because we don't want people to get caught by surprise.
Who's the watchdog for all this? I know the Department of Labor focuses on retirement plans. Is it someone else or HR?
This is the beauty of and the complexity of the HR compliance world, because from an HR compliance world, you have a lot of watchdogs, really. You have Department of Labor, but you also have the IRS, because the IRS gets involved from benefit plans, right? You have the ERISA guidelines, right? So you have like, those guidelines that guide your 401ks plus all of your group benefits for your health, dental, and medical, or health, dental, and vision. But then also you have your state and your local agencies too. So it's not just one, it's multiple, as you say, watchdogs that get involved at the end of the day.
I remember I gave up. I remember I was reaching out to different companies that had 401ks, and like all of this information is anyone can access it. And I looked up a plan, and more than half of the plan was not invested in any sort of investment. And I called and I said, hey, I looked at your plan, and more than half of the money your employees are putting away isn't in anything. It's in the stable value fund, which barely keeps up with inflation. And they're like, yeah, that's how we like it. And I was like, I remembered I was invited to this event, and there was a guy that used to work for the Department of Labor. And he goes, the Department of Labor had a really good year last year. And they have a really good year every single year because people are just doing what they're supposed to be doing.
It's the 401k side is interesting. I I remember very early on in my career, working for organizations where you had various members of the executive team, and then you'd pull in, you would create a committee amongst your staff for like a 401k input and decisions on how to build plans. And I remember in my early 20s, this sounded really interesting and really cool. People are kind of like all involved. And then I stepped back and I said, huh, I wonder who here really has like investment experience. Like everyone's kind of like pulling from like what they do at home with their with their wife and their family, pulling from like their parents and even like the CFOs too that I've worked with. It wasn't like anyone was ever like charter licensed or really had like a specialty in these areas. And then I started scratching my head. I'm like, wait a second. It's almost like we're kind of just rolling the dice here. And so once I started getting more into HR leadership roles, I always advocated for and believed the best option was to have an advisor attached to every 401k plan. Because ultimately, I was like, I can't legally give advice. What am I doing here? Wait, this isn't the right thing to do for the employees. And two, for the little bit of extra cost that might be involved, because again, you have to pay for the advisor and disclose that they're getting sound financial advice and ensuring with this money that's going into the plan is going into funds and investments that are aligned to their risk strategy. And everybody's risk strategy is different. So that's where I think today we're not there. We're also coming through this app trend of life where, the Robin Hoods of the world have made it really easy to throw money into the market, but maybe not necessarily understand everything we're doing behind those investments. So I think, again, building out long-term scalable strategies, and also my final point on this is like, I think having that financial advisor tied to the plan is also a key part to providing and ensuring that we're giving our employees financial wellness, which I think is also important in building out wellness strategies for our employees.
It sounds good, and it can be good, unless you get the wrong person that is showing up once a year. They do a
Right.
massive. It's too difficult at scale with more than 10 or 20 people to be able to give them this specific tailored advice, because everyone's financial situation is a snowflake. Every snowflake's a little bit different. Just because you're doing this doesn't mean you need to be doing the exact same thing. Now, outside of investing in HR, what is going on inside the HR world, other than a couple things that you mentioned that like haven't hit the news yet? Is there something that you're seeing that hasn't caught up with society?
Honestly, I think the thing that gets me the most right now is all the things that are in the news, that I don't think. So I think right now HR has been going through this revolution, which I have recently compared to how Microsoft rebrands Office every couple of years to trick you, like you're getting something new when really they just gave you a new facade and it's just the same old thing. I feel like we've been doing the same thing recently in HR. We're just like, oh, well, instead of HR, we're going to call it people ops. And then instead of creating synergy within HR, we've created silos, and now we've created distance and barriers between key functions of data analytics, benefits and compensation, employee relations, recruiting, culture, and DEI. These are all become separate silos that don't seem to be interacting like a orchestrated symphony. And so what happens is that when we have a recruiting function that isn't connected to the overall HR operations and culture, we're bringing in candidates that don't necessarily align to the business and the culture, which then tend to build into employee relations later down the road. Whereas if we were all orchestrated and on the same page, we have a nice streamlined process that eliminates future HR issues for us down the road. And so I see an opportunity for us to lead by example, become more integrated as HR functions, particularly in larger organizations. And I also see an opportunity here for us to just stop the jargon, stop the name changing. This whole quiet quitting thing really caught me the wrong way. Or I said, quiet quitting. We've been talking about that 15 years ago. It's been employee engagement. Nothing's new. We just haven't changed anything. And employee engagement and trust among people in general has been at a low, at an all-time low. So let's not change terminology. Let's focus on outcomes and results.
You put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig, like no matter what you want to call it. And I wish organizations would learn from the best example I could think of off the top of my head is sports teams. Everyone has a role on the team. And as long as they do what they're supposed to do and they do it well, the team itself will win. And I feel like this is why I started my own company, is because, you know, people just, I don't know, it's not like a team feeling, like you were saying with the silos. It's like, how do you get everyone to come together? And that could be, is it a hiring system that needs to be fixed, or I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It's awesome, actually, that you said that. I was about to Google and I can't forget. The names are escaping my mind right now. But when Peloton went through the big shakeup and John Foley exited Peloton and they brought in the new CEO to lead, his opening speech to the Peloton team, to the company-wide team was
Barry McCarthy.
Barry McCarthy, yes. He came in and he shared, we're no longer going to run this business like a family. We're going to run it like a sports team. We're going to put the right people in the right roles to perform. Like, we need everybody to perform to their best. And I recall going back in my 20s when Reid Hoffman, the founder and CEO of LinkedIn, joined two other individuals, and the three of them co-wrote a Harvard Business Review article. And they said, listen, we have to stop referring to businesses as family. We're not family. The family, you don't get to pick family. You love family and you deal with family through thick and thin. Unfortunately, the reality is in business, employees have options. They pick employers, they pick bosses, and they leave employers and bosses when they're frustrated. We confuse this idea of family, and we don't want to misstate it and think that, people are just going to stay here because they love us. That's not the truth. Like, we have to live up to our commitment in regards to the employee value proposition we put forth, just like our employees need to live up to their commitment to fulfill the roles and hit the goals that they committed to through the hiring process. And that's really where we've kind of missed the mark over the years. And I believe as we've come out of COVID and we've restructured our hiring needs and our hiring focuses, we're getting better at this commitment from the employer and the employee perspective.
One of the last guests we had, Mike Seidel, he developed software to help with the hiring process. Maybe you need to talk to him. Essentially, he said he's been cutting the hiring process by more than 30% in time using the software, because he was talking about the recruiters are spending their time doing things that have nothing to do with recruiting and speeding up the process, such as background checks, drug tests, actually getting someone to the interview. And he was talking about, especially now with the younger generation coming out of school, when you send them an email, what happens? Nothing. You have to be sending them text messages, because from research, typically a text message is read in only a few minutes versus email. It's so easy to lose an email with the amount of spam that everyone is hit with. And I believe they just came out with rules about all of these spam emails that people have been doing in terms of just buying lists and sending a million emails and hoping 100 people respond.
Right. I'll never forget. It must have been at this point like 10 years ago when I closed a management level role via text. I was like, oh wow, I just closed the recruiting process via text. It was like rarely did we use text at that time in recruiting and such. And it was such a snowball effect from there. But the one thing that's one part of it. The one thing that hasn't changed really in recruiting that needs to change a lot in regards to the to stay true to like this instant gratification and timely feedback and efficiency is being giving real feedback to candidates. My career actually started in recruiting 20 years ago, and I loved it. That was like my entree into HR. But I believe the one of the things that helped me grow my career in that was not being afraid to give candidates honest feedback. You know, if we were 15 minutes into a conversation, we had booked an hour and it wasn't the right fit, I leaned into that and at least saved that person the rest of their 45 minutes or agony of like, you know, is there going to be a follow-up call? And just being honest based on the current needs, what the team is looking for, your background, it's not the right fit now. Love the conversation. Hope we stay in touch in the future. But that's really, I think, where candidates are also just still remaining frustrated. They feel this is where that whole idea of ghosting comes into play. They've invested 30, 45 minutes with you, and hey, going to pass you along to the hiring managers, really excited about this conversation. But in the back of the recruiter's mind, they're like, I wonder if this person's really going to stick or not. And I'm not really sure, but I'm going to let the manager look at it. We need to get more honest in our recruiting feedback. We need to help our managers by giving them the right people for the right role, holding our managers accountable for these are the skills and the qualifications you asked for, and this is what we've served up to you. Why isn't this working? And streamline that process, and that's what's going to make it better for that candidate experience and have candidates have a better opinion of the employers they're interviewing with.
Love to get your opinion on what I did when I was looking for someone to help me. I did group interviews, up to 10 people,
Interesting.
because
How
I
did that
want to
go
see
for you?
who participates. I want to see people how they interact with strangers. Are they shy? Are they more open? As well as if one person asks a question, I don't have to answer the same question 12 times, 15 times in a day, depending on, that'd be a lot of meetings in one day. We'll call it 5 or 6 meetings in a day. That'd be a lot of meetings too. And it helped me weave out people a lot faster. And some people didn't like it. And I was like, well, if you don't like a group interview, how are you going to be in a group meeting?
Right. It's an interesting perspective. I will say this though. You have to remember if you bring in different personalities into a group setting, the individual with the type A personality and the big voices is going to speak up, and their ideas tend to be heard more so than those who might be more reserved or introvert. But the reserved or introvert might actually have the most stellar idea. However, if they're not asked to speak, if they're not given a moment to speak, if the person leading the meeting isn't recognizing that they're not talking, you're going to miss out on that. And that's structuring meetings and structuring those types of collaboration. That's where we get into those conversations of like, are we creating a safe space for everybody to participate, not just the loudest voice to participate?
Totally. And that comes down to the person running the interview. You could see someone spend 15 minutes in, someone hasn't said anything. You can be like, hey, Chelsea, I noticed you haven't said anything, but it looks like you have something on your mind. Are you able to share that with us, please? And then you see if they're able to actually contribute. Because someone like me, I don't want to talk for the sake of talking, because I've learned I could have the best idea in the world. Unfortunately, if someone doesn't care about what my thoughts are, why should I even speak up? It's just a waste of
Right,
energy to me. That's the way I feel.
right, right. No, I think that's smart. And again, I think if you take the balanced approach to it, particularly if you're looking in an environment where you're looking for people to work collaboratively, it's important to understand what's the team dynamic, and understand where to meet your employees at, through that process. Because again, if you knew, hey, this person's going to be a little bit more quiet and reserved, but they have great ideas, then I know, hey, I want to make sure that I invite them into the conversations, and I create an opportunity for them to speak up. But that's the person I want. Or maybe we need somebody who's going to be a little bit more engaged and a little bit more forceful in the conversation. It also depends on the environment in which you're operating, right? And those intricacies are all different for every organization.
And like you said, it comes down to communication. Something I super struggle with. I went to school for math, didn't have to talk much. You just had to prove things on paper. So that was difficult for me. And I've learned how to come up with different ways of presenting things, such as if I'm talking with Glenn, and I'm like, Glenn's expectation coming in to a meeting is we're going to a Elton John concert, and he shows up and Taylor Swift's on the stage. We could still have a good time, but that expectation is going to be completely wrong. So setting that expectation and knowing when to push without being pushy. I think I don't know who I heard, but one person online on social media said like, "Hey, do I have your permission to speak direct to you right now? Like, could I be direct?" And you get that permission before you just say, "Hey, my first manager is, hey, Josh, listen to a call. How do you think you did?" "I did great. I answered their question. I went above and beyond." Like, well, Josh, there's always room for improvement. Yeah, in hindsight, but in the moment, you play the best you can in the game. I mean, you could score 50 points in a basketball game and you go 70% for the floor. There's still room for improvement there, but you did the best you could in the moment. And that's what it comes down
Right.
to in business. You only have that moment.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that sure we can all improve. I think that's a catch-all. And almost I think so. You know what that reminds me of when you make that statement? It goes back to those reports we were reading about, or I was reading about, in regards to Belichick and Brady. When everything was kind of when Brady was leaving, and I guess more recently when people were diagnosing that relationship between the two of them, and what really fell apart was Brady had gone to the owner, had gone to Kraft multiple times. It was just like, I'm done. I feel totally deflated here. I am absolutely crushing it. We've gotten multiple rings, but Belichick over there is just like cold shouldering me. He's just, hey, keep doing it. That was okay. Subpar. Can do better. But then Belichick came out and was like, well, Brady always played better with a chip on his shoulder. Oh, so your coaching style was kind of one where it's like, hey, if I made him feel a little bit deflated, if I gave him a chip on the shoulder, he would play better. But ultimately, you pushed a guy out of the organization. So was that really the best long-term strategy? So there's a little bit there is some danger in that idea of like, well, do we support people and applaud them? We should always applaud, always praise people for doing great and giving their best and producing, without feeling like we have to hold them back for them to raise up. I don't like that latter part.
That's where how you coach in sports is different in the corporate world a little bit. You could be a little meaner
Yep.
in sports. You can get in people's faces. Some would argue. And then you look at the best coaches in the world that people actually respect. In football, people really love Tony Dungy because of his approach, very soft spoken. People love Steve Kerr now. Phil Jackson, he knew when to turn up the heat. At the same time, though, everyone that's seen The Last Dance saw he treated every single person on that team differently. He knew, Michael, you don't even need me. But at times you have to pull them back. Like in
Yep.
sales, you have some people you have to pull back. You're like, you're being too aggressive. And then some people you got to push a little bit to get them outside their comfort zone. So it's all about being adaptable and knowing how to communicate to certain people, such as like you have your people come on a call, they want to talk about how your day is. If you're talking to someone who's like a CEO, or just get to the point, like, tell me why we're here, what we're doing, how can we get this done in as short of time possible. So having that strategy, hopping into a meeting in order to coach your employees so that they can perform the best when they're in the game.
And that's really the biggest focus of HR these days. There is such an investment that companies are making in hiring, and great. And look at the fantastic jobs report that just came out today. Just surprised everybody, and the market's all excited about it. We're back to hiring, but that's only like the very first part of the puzzle is hiring. The bigger piece now is really encouraging, supporting, and maximizing that investment in our employees. And by that, it's really building up their human capabilities, taking those talents and helping them reach their highest level of capability. And for me, in my view, we really need to shift from developing managers to developing coaches. Because quite honestly, nobody wants to be managed. You don't want to be managed. I don't want to be managed. People just don't want to be managed. The best things to manage, in my opinion, is technology. Manage the heck out of your technology, manage process, and manage procedures. People want to be coached. They want to be developed. I've always found that, again, it's a two-way street. People come in, yes, because they want to earn money. They want to earn a good living. But the vast majority of people want to increase their value and want to increase their worth. And that's through learning on the job. That's from learning from their leadership and through managers, and sharing of knowledge. And so that's where this mindset of like coaching, and the phrase I've used in the past, particularly with new managers coming up, is you're now a multiplier. It's no longer about your individual contributions to the company, which is probably one of the single hardest transitions for a new manager to overcome. Is you're no longer being evaluated on your individual contributions. You're being evaluated on your team's performance, and you were selected for this because you have done great things. Now the company wants your great things to be passed on to your team. They want to see your team replicate your great things. You're a multiplier. You're a multiplier of X. And so that can be a very, very big psychological change for new managers that is often overlooked through that development of new leaders.
I feel like the best players don't make the best coaches
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
I didn't even know this. My wife and I, we watched the documentary about the Lakers, which was like really cool, like talking about like Jerry Buss and everyone. And I didn't even know Magic Johnson was the coach for the Lakers. And they interviewed one of the former players. They're like, man, he's yelling at me to do XYZ. And the player's just like, dude, I'm not Magic Johnson. I can't do that.
Right. Right. Because sometimes that best player is thinking about how they've talked to themselves, how they've performed, their unique skill sets, versus thinking about, meeting that individual, that player, where they're at, identifying their strengths and weaknesses, and finding those opportunities of not what you were always great at, but like, how do I take what you're doing and improve that, or help you polish that, and level up that game. Because again, it wasn't, from Magic Johnson's perspective, it was, hey, listen, I'm out there trying to win every game. I'm out there performing X, Y, and Z. The change in becoming the coach was, well, now I have a team of 10 players that I need to leverage each one of their strongest skill sets to win the game. I don't need one, I need all of them. And if I can find and put them all in the right roles, we'll crush it. Same with leading the teams. Once that individual contributor moves to manager, it's identifying those strengths and weaknesses and then putting those people in the right positions to perform.
Got to get in where you fit in. That's super important. And ultimately, that's what pushed me out of my first job after school. My manager, not good. Didn't ask me any questions. I had some family member that was like in hospice. Like I just
Oh
was
no.
at school. It was my first job. And it was just went from having complete freedom in school to feeling like you're in prison. And
Right.
it's like, you
Right.
don't do something their way. It's like, hey, Josh, why didn't you do it this way? Well, I did it this way because it's actually more efficient. Well, Josh, the reason we do it this way. And it's like, well, it reminds me of when I took physics and my teacher's like, Josh, why'd you do it this way? I was like, well, if you take the derivative, it's actually a 1-step process versus the way you're teaching it is a 7-step process. So I can get the answer faster and it's actually easier to understand. And she just looked at me like, Mr. Krafchick, you're actually correct. And I was like, all right, cool. And that's where I've always struggled. And ultimately, that's what pushed me out of corporate America, is just people not being open to new ideas and just being stuck in whatever world they're in.
Right. And so a good part of my career has been in the tech space. And one thing that I've really found there is there's two different mindsets that I've seen coming up. And I don't think that this by any means is just towards tech. I think this happens in every industry. It's you have the ego type of interviews where it's they're challenging you in every situation in every way to like have the right answer when you could probably have multiple answers for a particular situation, but they'll challenge you and push you because the interviewer believes something is their way, and so they're going to push you on why you believe something different, versus the other interviews where it's much more open and no one really cares about what the answer is, but more about how did you go about coming to that answer? What was your thought process? And for me, I've always found that the more we focus on the thought process and how somebody approaches a challenge, it becomes far more valuable to us at the end of the day, and understanding individuals' approaches, because through that we can understand how we can collaborate, how we can work together, and also what we see through that is when somebody's working us through our thought process, if we try to offer a suggestion or offer a different approach, seeing how they respond to that. Are they open to alternatives? Are they dead set in how they approach something? Because again, we it's being malleable is really important in today's ever-changing world, right? We see AI coming along as the next tech trend. How do we lean into new things and adapt our processes and how we approach solutions? So for me, it's get away from what the right answer is and how we did things, because usually that's the end of a business, is saying, well, this is how we've always done it. It's usually the beginning of a decline, versus saying, oh, cool, but why did you do it that way? I'm interested. I'm intrigued. So leading with questions and leading with intrigue, I always find to be more valuable.
Back in the day, people always cut trees with the hatchet, and then someone invented the chainsaw. That's what Mike talked about on his episode. And you can cut a lot more trees with the chainsaw than you can a hatchet, but that's the way we've always done it. So let's keep using the hatchet. And what would happen to a company that used a hatchet versus a chainsaw? I'm sure they're out of business because they have higher costs and they're less efficient. And if you're spending money on something and it costs you time and more money, that's a recipe for disaster. This was fun, Glenn. Happy to have you on. You're doing it all in the HR space, and appreciate having you on. We'll see everyone next time. Bye, everyone.